Lucian Febre's book, which is called something like The Problem of Unbelief in the 16th Century in the Age of Rabelais, should give us the first example of the problem of the general notion of atheism taken as an historical investigation rather than a Socratic investigation. Look at just examining the different types that have come forward historically rather than trying to rise up out of history to a more irrational determination of atheism. So there, this was published in apparently 1937, so it's an interesting time period. And the basic thesis is we couldn't understand what the accusation of atheism meant in the 16th century, exactly because the metaphysics of Newton has radically displaced the categories in which men thought at that time in such a way that his principal proof is given through the change in the meaning of causality. So of course we all know verbally that there's something called the quote-unquote the four causes of Aristotle, or the four aeatia, which corresponds to the word etiology, the science of causes given straightforwardly, but I've tried to, in the scholarship, when we look at the first attestations of this word aeatia, they come, I think the very first one is of a court noble excusing himself from the presence of the king, and somehow the word aeatia is given there, as though he were giving a cause for leaving the presence of the sovereign. Okay, so that, putting that as one example, let's consider in the light of this. So Zizek's version of atheism is one version, and we have Zizek giving this interview with Sean Carroll, so concerning physics, and then the concept of atheism in the connection to that discussion seems to have to do with this notion of the materialist versus the New Age obscurantist in Zizek's version. So I think it's a very one reason I like Zizek is because it's like the Balzac notion of the human zoo. So you see a personality which obviously has this super ego which keeps telling it, oh, it's really cool to be wear your pants hanging down like this, but instead hanging down in such a way that's the signal that you're a materialist, so that you explain everything through something along the lines of saying this person has merely stupidly said something because they think that the social norms demand it, and it's not that they've actually seen what they claim to see. So for instance, in the case of somebody, here's a good version of the difference of the basic mentality here in the modern version. Somebody says, you look like relatives. You look like this. You look just like your aunt. But then it comes out that the aunt had been adopted, so that the materialist then says, well, this is just because people think they have to say inane things of this kind due to the demands of etiquette, and therefore they've thoughtlessly uttered this thing that they thought was a pleasantry, even though the person hearing it realizes it's totally stupid. But the other side of it is, what if they actually did see a similarity? Because, of course, it happens just as we say certain couples look alike, or people look like their dogs, probably because the gestures and even the facial expressions start to change and people do start to look alike. As soon as you get to phenomena like that, which bring out the ambiguity of how people look, then you get closer to what worries Zizek. And then you see in Zizek, even though his superego is telling him not to treat those things seriously, they're constantly bristling in his discussions, because he's saying things like, how did it happen when he was a young man and he went to this remote military base, that when he got there they already knew about features of his sexual life which they couldn't possibly know, and there was no telephone at that outpost, and other things of like kind. He's always bristling with this notion that it's very uncanny about Peter Falk's betrayal of Colombo, how they managed to make it seem very plausible that Peter Falk is somehow divining these things about the crime in each episode. There's many expressions of this difficulty in Zizek. Another example might be of this so-called what atheism is today as against in another time. Well, let me give another example. Remember the clouds, the Nephili of Aristophanes, about how Socrates and his companions are atheists. But what does atheist mean in that sense? It means that some of the theoi, or the gods that are worshipped at Athens, are not worshipped by Socrates. But what does the theoi mean? It's let's put it this way: in the Garden of Academus, which was named after some I guess a hero divinity or so, and was given over to Plato, or the followers to Plato, to found his academy, which the current universities are still called by the academy. There were shrines to Socrates and to Platon himself. That's what it meant to be a theoi, is to be a daimon, to be or something which was comparable to the household gods or the hearth gods, the Lares, Lares, in the Latin or Roman usage. So to go against the guide would be something like going against one of those, against Socrates or Plato's direction, or against whoever stands for the university, for instance. Prior to that, there would have been other meanings, because there would have been the pantheon of the 12 gods, of 6 men and 6 women, representing the basic character types of human beings. And so it would have had different meanings at different times. And another, of course, we see in Voltaire and Goethe have both made the same empty witticism, which is to say, I know about as much about being as do my teachers, the metaphysicians, meaning that the teachers know nothing about being either. It's just an enigma. This was said against the Catholics, because the Catholics have put forward this theory, which is now basically Zizek favors, which is that being means a thing, being already somehow assumes to mean a theory about something placed in space and time in some sense, and then back behind being the enigma of God. But another version, I think, But okay, but that I wanted to say is it seems very different when we hear that from um, Voltaire, who's kind of a vulgar uh, preparer of the French Revolution, which basically meant uh, the envy of the higher clergy felt by the rising commercial classes, which spanned almost equally all the estates. So that there was already no real distinction between the estates by the time they were supposedly dissolved during the French Revolution. So I cite there the book called The Social Interpretation of the French Revolution. Um, so on the other side, we have Goethe making the same remark, but for totally different motivations, even though it also involves in some way, of course, Goethe lived in a Protestant country. He wasn't so worried about Catholic rule as Voltaire was, but still, basically, we have the same issues of break from the system which has come down to us still from Platon and Socrates and Aristotle. Break from the metaphysics, but in Goethe's sense, he doesn't want to break from metaphysics in order to go to Newton or to the new theory of cause that is our forces that have come in and which we take as mother's milk, as Leo Strauss would say, and can't sort of sense the uncanniness in it or where we stand in it. So they take on a totally different character. But okay, that all aside, let's look at another example where Zizek is bringing in. I don't know if he does it on purpose. It's extremely stupid. He says, a historicist is somebody who thinks in order to understand Shakespeare, so he's playing on the ambiguity of the word Shakespeare. Does Shakespeare mean the plays of Shakespeare, or does it mean Shakespeare the man? In order to understand Shakespeare, the historicist says, this is Zizek's version of historicism, extremely stupid, and also not just stupid, but also he's deliberately puts in this trick of not clarifying the ambiguity of Shakespeare himself, the one who wrote. What did he think he was writing? What was his understanding of what he's writing? And Shakespeare, the object that he's created to play, like Samuel Beckett used to say, I've produced an object, don't ask me about it. He says, the historicist tells you in order to understand Shakespeare without clarifying that ambiguity, one must know all about Elizabethan England. Go study Elizabethan England. And then he says, as though it were some revelation that, oh no, I, Zizek, have corrected this matter, and the real way to deal with it is to understand Elizabethan England by reading it according to what we read in Shakespeare, which is, of course, obvious, and any intelligent classical scholar who was attempting to find out what's in the mind of Shakespeare would take that into account. But the thing is, with Shakespeare, we don't usually try to do that. But let me make it clear what I mean. With Plato, we are very interested to know, what did Plato really think? And then we learn a hell of a lot when we know what the politics were at Plato's time, and a little before Plato's time, and what everybody in Athens could be presumed to know just by being an Athenian citizen, and which Plato would have taken for granted. We've learned a great deal from that kind of thing when we're, to some extent, trying to find out, what did Plato think, what did Socrates himself think, what did Aristotle think. On the other hand, if we take a Socratic dialogue as a piece of art, in something like the way that art is most prevalently understood today, something frilly, something not too serious, something subjective, and so on, then of course we can say, oh yes, this will give us some insights into what the Athenians were like, since after all, Plato was an Athenian, and Aristophanes too was an Athenian, and so on. this kind of complex of ideas somehow as a weight in Zizek when he's telling us what is obscurantist and what is atheist and supposedly solid according to his, both, I would say in that sense, both according to what he's thought out and according to his superego telling him it's really cool to have that position. Okay, so that's just a little reflection on the concept of atheism. I add one more. Let me add one more. In Freud, when we have actually, this is a very important one, is this notion, this unclarified notion of what it means from a kind of a French laissez perspective to assert that there's only us, quote unquote, there's only us. So of course, does it mean aren't there also squirrels, or are there also, I don't know, blackberry bushes, or pollard English elms or something? What does it mean? There's only us, only human beings? What does that? I think this question could be put in the following manner: the only us means not this kind of Freud. It means that there's also, and I think there is some truth to it, even a good deal of truth to it, which is why people fasten on it, is this notion of the primordial father in Freud. So that notion also carries on in our ordinary life. For instance, in Zizek himself, or for me in Dugin, or Leo Strauss, or so on. Yes, so there's an element where we have this primordial father sense, and then we say, oh, tradition is in reality was a human being who was saying something, and then we give them this great weight, far exceeding what they deserve as just another man, just simple, stupid people. But that sense totally leaves out that even though that's true, there's still everything beyond is the primordial father. So I would even kind of switch it around and say there's kind of the zoo field that Balzac has said, the zoo of the human being, the human comedy that he tries to show in close, but which as philosophers we try to show through their thought, through their views of what science is. And there we can immediately see that the same problem that has stimulated the first thinkers exists, which is, yes, these current ones are shadowy reflections that don't fulfill the hunger for wisdom, but they only suggest something higher and better. So Zizek says that. So Zizek's father figure is, according to his superego version, is Hegel. I don't know, maybe it's somebody else really, but it's clear that we're always hoping that somebody will come along that's better, right? So then it suggests these infinite levels, which then bring us into this, as Carl Jung says, the point where critical reason comes to a halt, then becomes suggested in a way that seems very plausible. So I think all those are reflections that show this basic concept of atheism is very hard to trap, hard to clamp down on.